Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So my hope and goal is to share my journey, and hopefully there's some nuggets that you can get out of it that you can apply to your own lives, or you can share with others that find themselves in the same position. And so I'm going to share with you what life happens when you don't plan it. And although we're going through right now, you know, COVID 2020 and the crisis that everyone's feeling, you'll see when I talk about my journey that it's my whole entire life has been some version of a crisis. And so I'm just going to tell you and share with you very genuinely and openly about how I managed through it, right or wrong. It was my journey, and that's kind of how I got through it. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to rewind you guys back. So what you don't know about me, or probably don't know about me, is that in the last 15 years of my life, which is what I'm going to cram into 30 quick minutes to share with you today, is that I went essentially from completely homeless to where I'm at now as a incredibly blessed vice president at Morgan Stanley. And so I wanted to share with you that journey of how do you literally go from nothing to where I'm at today. And I think these things will be very applicable to where you are. So at that time, rewind back to Friday, August 26, 2005, and I'm living in New Orleans, Louisiana, when Hurricane Katrina comes. And on that particular Friday night, I was suffering from kidney failure. Both of my kidneys were failing. My current husband at the time, we went to the hospital, said my kidneys were failing, and I didn't want to stay in the hospital because we knew the storm was coming and there was always a risk of New Orleans flooding. So I said, well, let's just evacuate. It'd probably just be a few days anyway. We packed our bags, just enough for, like I said, 2 or 3 days of being gone, assumed we'd be right back. At the time, I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old on my hip. Off we go. We didn't take the animals. We only took one car. We were, about as unprepared as 2 people could possibly be for the disaster that was to come. Get to where we were evacuating, and sometime in the night, and you may hear me cry because this is always emotional. Sometime in the night, across the street from where our house lived, the levee breached, and we lost everything. And just like that, no house, no job, no dogs, no stuff, no money, no nothing. Just like that, gone, without one single preparation. How do you recover from that, right? So thankfully, my first husband was a geology major at University of New Orleans, and some professor friends of his had accepted professor positions at Kansas State University. And they said, hey, you guys come up here and go to school. Within 5 days, we went from, I was at the time, I had just finished my undergraduate degree in biomedical sciences, thought I'd be a medical doctor. The next week, I was enrolling as a geology student at Kansas State University. I had no clue what I was going to do with this decision. We were hardly there when my 4-year-old looks up at me and says, Mom, I'm just ready to go home. I want to go home, Mama. Crushed my soul. Still 15 years later, crushes my soul. When you can't provide for your kids, it's a real big deal. And it may not be that monumental feeling, right? But it's the one we deal with as professional parents. And I couldn't explain to my 4-year-old we had no home. We had no job. But I was going to make sure she never felt that way again, ever. So instantly, I changed my degree to geology. Other than hearing my husband talk, I had no idea what I was really going to do. The oil and gas division was booming at the time. I had quickly had to build a resume in speed time and figure out really quick how I was going to get the skills that I needed to get a job. And these are some of the nuggets that I really hope that you guys take away from this. One of them is the resume building. So I went to a student expo in order to, in the oil and gas industry world, there are these student expos that you go and you attempt as a student to market yourself and get a job. Well, I came with the worst resume ever. But what I did walk away with, without a job, by the way, what I did walk away with was a book. They had printed out all the resumes of the other students that came for jobs that day. And I noticed that the companies that had been there went through and made all these notes in the resume, stuff they liked, stuff they didn't like. I now know not to put a picture on a resume. I can't tell you how many X's I saw in pictures. Anyway, so I decided I would study these resumes and figure out how to build the best resume I could possibly build, because I didn't have time. I didn't have 4 years to build this resume. I had completely run out of time because of this tragedy, basically, that had been thrust upon me. So to build that resume in the most aggressive way possible, I went through and figured out all the skills that they highlighted as the most valuable skills that they were looking for in a new hire. And then I turned my attention completely on how to build it. I got myself involved in professional organizations. If there wasn't one in my school, I started one. If I started it, I elected myself president. I went through and had an incredible amount of conversation with our alumni council. If you're not involved with your alumni council, I cannot stress how important that is. Those people were critical in helping guide me. And the kind of questions I asked were, what kind of resume do you need to get across your table and you're going to hire me right now? And at first, people, if you ask this, people will tell you, well, the minimum requirements of your job position are a degree in this, and make sure you have that. Okay, well, that's just fantastic. I don't have time for that. I need to jump to the gun. I need you to tell me. I'm talking about the resume that you get, and you go, wow, we need to hire her. Or, wow, find a position for this person. That's the resume that I needed to be built because I was already married with children. I didn't have time to waste. And then the Alumni Council began to really guide me in, okay, I see what you're asking. You're talking about the extra stuff. And then they started giving me those skills. And again, that's what I went out and really started to build around my industry. I had the advantage in Kansas, the geologic survey courses in Kansas. They offer courses to the professional geologists there that are super high dollar, but to a graduate student it was free. I highly encourage, for those of y'all that are still students, check around in your societies. It's not advertised. I had no idea the classes were free. I took every single class they offered so that I could build a resume that I could take to a job interview, and I could say, hey, look, I may not have the traditional geology undergrad, because as you can imagine, trying to sell why I needed a geology position with a biomedical science background was a little bit of a challenge. And so, but what I could sell them on is, okay, yeah, that is my reality, but hey, look what I took the initiative to do. I took the initiative to build these things. Isn't that the person you want here? And because of that, I was able to really build a foundation and expedite my professional position really fast. I think it was absolutely pivotal in getting me back on track after going through what I went through. Another huge question or thing I did was I interviewed for every job. I applied for every job I possibly could, whether I was qualified or not. My thought was, if I wasn't qualified, well, they could decide that. But what if they saw me and go, well, she's not really qualified, but she has tons of potential. We can train her. And so I don't ever make the decision of if I'm qualified. I let the company I apply for decide that. But when I was new, I don't do it now, but when I was newly coming through during this part of my life, I asked every single interviewer, I waited till the end, because usually an interviewer will introduce themselves and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I have this many years of experience. It's kind of the same thing we already did on our panel and I've done. At the end of the interview, they say, do you have any other questions? And I always asked, knowing what you know today, knowing your years of expertise, what advice do you wish someone had given you at my age? That advice that I received over and over again was critical in continuing to mold me to become the person I am today. So that expertise and leaning on that was absolutely critical. Okay, next slide. All right, so so then from there, it came time for me to actually do the next internship and get my first internship. I was so excited. The resume building worked. Everything was a success. I landed my first oil and gas internship. This was a huge deal for our family. This was a year now has passed. So we survived getting past the being homeless. We had incredible local community help us. And we were able to get an apartment and provide for my children. Finished my first year getting a master's degree in geology, and now it was time for my first oil and gas job in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The catch is we didn't have quite enough time and money at this point. I had not rebounded in order to actually work the internship. And so this is when it really got interesting for me, because just the outside intervention of just how things kind of come together for you were pretty incredible for me. So the guy that hired me asked me if I had gotten my plane ticket to get there, and I had not, because we didn't have any money, and I didn't know how I was going to get there. And it's not that my family didn't have money to help me, it's that my entire family also, out of my entire family, we all lost all of our houses and all of our stuff during Katrina. So everyone had their own issues. So I couldn't even lean on my family at this point. So I had no money for a plane ticket, prayed like crazy. At the last minute, the guy who hired me said, "Hey, I have free miles. Why don't I go ahead and just get your ticket? We probably won't use them." And I thought, oh, thank you, Jesus, yes. So give it to you my plane ticket. The next step was where I was going to stay when I got there. I had looked up homeless shelters. I was completely prepared to stay with that. My husband was going to stay with the kids. And he said, "Well, where are you staying when you get here?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet." And he goes, "Well, I have free miles at the hotel. Why don't I just get you a room there, and then I'll pick you up on the way to work?" I'm like, "Oh, wow, this is awesome." So do that, get to work. Same thing kind of happens. He says, "Where are you staying tonight?" And there was a homeless shelter down the street in downtown Fort Worth. And I said, "Oh, I have somewhere to stay. I'll be fine. I'll figure it out." "No, we pay for a hotel corporate account. Why don't you just stay in the hotel until you get settled?" And it literally was just one opportunity after the next, just like that, until, I was just blessed with this wonderful job. I was finally to a position where and he had no idea. I waited probably 2 or 3 years to tell this man what an impact he made on me. For him, it was free points. So, again, for those of us that have the 15 years experience and you have free points, don't underestimate the power of those points for people starting out, because you don't know where they are in their lives. And it was huge for me. So after I finished that internship, ended up moving on it opened up doors for me to get a PhD at Michigan State. My advisor was friends with my advisor there. I went on to get a PhD there. If you're not familiar with the oil and gas business, a PhD in the oil and gas world is, it's really more for a research component, which is not really what I ever wanted to do. I wanted to stay on more of the operations side, which a PhD is not necessary, but since it was free, I went ahead and went that route. But what I did not want to do is unplug from my industry. Again, this is about life happening. So, of course, through all this, no surprise, my marriage did not last. It was just an unbelievable amount of stress. And although I would love to tell you it was his fault, I'm sure it was my fault too. And that was the other part of this journey, is just learning about how do you reflect on your own part. I have 4 daughters. I convey to them all the time, you want it to be your fault so you can fix it. When it's not your fault, then you have to make a decision to accept it or to bail. But as long as it's your fault, you can fix it. And so I tried really hard to accept my responsibility in that, so that I didn't take it with me in future relationships, and made a vow to work with the Father so that my kids were as normal as possible. And so far, thank you, we've managed to maintain our friendship through it. And through that process, though, I never did stop unplugging in the student expos that I mentioned in the first time. Even though I was working on a 4-year PhD, never unplug from your market. You don't know what it's doing if you unplug. I went to every student expo, and why that was so important to me is I went to one student expo, and let's say there's 100 students there looking for a job. I go to the same student expo the next year, and now there's 500 students looking for a job. I go to the next one, there's 1,500. People, that's a big deal. You're not going to have a job. Like, the job market is saturating with really awesome competitive students, and I knew I needed to jump out of the PhD world and jump in there and get a job. And that's what I did. I finished 2 years at a PhD program and said, I got to bail. So in 2009, I went to the Student Expo. I was hired on the spot. I was offered about 6 job offers and took my first geology position and moved to Houston. And what I thought, this is the best job ever. I'm just going to stay here and I'm just going to retire here. I'm not going to jump around. I'm going to be with this company forever. What I failed to see was the importance of all this momentum that I've shared with you guys. I failed to see how important it was to continue to network. When the company began its potential split, when it was becoming 2 separate companies, there were talks of layoffs and things like that. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't kept on top of that. And that's really incredibly important, because while my company is deciding to split in half, as you can see in the bullets, I decided to remarry, and then at the same time my dad died. Like, life is going to continue to happen whether we plan it or not. You can go to the next slide, please. So during this time, again, I can't stress the networking part enough, because I started to ask myself, okay, well, how am I going to get the second job? Where am I going to go? Who am I going to work with? Luckily, one of my bosses I had worked with at the first job moved to my second job and offered me a job there. I went on to move at that job. The challenge this job faced is I had boss challenges. And so, what do you do when you've got a boss you can't work with? They're, in your opinion, terrible. They think you're terrible. Now what do you do? And the dynamics between us was just something I'd never dealt with before. I'd never had anyone tell me I wasn't worthy. I'd never had anyone tell me they couldn't work with me. I was always above average on everything from evaluations, and yet here was this almost roadblock in my career, and I wasn't sure how to handle that. The dynamics moved after about 9 months of working with him, and I ended up getting laid off at that job. And when I did, I had a colleague that really came to me, because at this point, again, you don't know who is in your life that's going to really help kind of pull your bootstraps up when things go south. And she stepped in. She worked for one of the service companies, stepped in and said, hey, just remember sometimes, just because God closes the door doesn't mean there's not a really awesome path for you. And it was the words I kind of needed to hear at the right time. And sure enough, a third job opened up within about a week after that. I started it pretty financially and emotionally bankrupt. Just coming off of all this just seemed like, you ever feel like it's like, good Lord, is there anything else more that can happen? And so at this point, my job interviews and my career had kind of taken a little more of a turn. And so instead of asking the question I mentioned before, now I look more of I go through my interview and I get to the end and I'll say, hey, are there any other questions or concerns you may have that will keep you from hiring me right now? And that question has saved nearly every job I've ever applied for. It gives them an opportunity to ask me the things that I may not have mentioned, but doesn't mean I can't do, that they were going to refuse to hire me for. And so, again, that question proved to be the actual magic maker of my career. All right, next slide, please. The other thing with the resumes I meant to mention is I have multiple resumes, so that was another take-home I figured out was a really big deal. If I'm applying for an operational geology job, then my resume is heavy on my operational skills. If I'm applying for a vice president at Morgan Stanley job, then my expertise is going to focus on that. So I'm not a one resume only gal. I probably have 5. Like I tail it. Now I'm not lying. I just highlight different features of it. And so that's something else that's proved to be very beneficial to me. So then I started, when I was at my third job, then the market turned down. That was when we hit our first downturn. And I ended up with, well, we haven't laid off yet, but we're going to, and we're going to get rid of all you people, go find a job. So I'm back to now trying to find a job with no job market. Worked with a recruiter, managed to get on with the first job, and now I'm working with a challenging coworker. And anytime you work with a challenging coworker, it's unbelievably difficult because they're right there with you all the time. Everything we do now is a team environment, and you're expected to play nice with others. And so you know, everybody's coworker situation is different. And mine, my coworker did not want me to shine, but she wanted my ideas so she could shine. And that just created a very difficult situation for me to manage. In order to somewhat, I wouldn't say overcome, but in order to just try to manage that, I think as someone going through that at the time, you really have to ask yourself, is this an environment that you need to stay in? You don't wait for that environment to decide for you, but you need to actively decide if you need to be in that situation or not, and no one can make that call but you. And then in the meantime of dealing with my coworker, my only brother dies. So again, it's just another one of those, well, you know, you ever just feel like God just targets you, or is it the devil, or why is it that you're going through this again? So at this point, I came into work one day, closed the door, I dropped to my knees, but just fell into tears. I was like, good Lord, I just can't do this anymore. I can't fix it. I don't know what's going on. I can't make this happen. I'm doing everything I think I can. I've been as successful as I possibly can. I'm just giving it to you and let you fix this. So I get off my hands and knees, open my office door, get my little ducks back in a row. I sit down at my desk, and this is where I think God has a sense of humor, because the phone rang, and it was a recruiter. I had not applied for a job. I did not apply for this job, and I had not considered up to this point of ever working for a bank. So the recruiter from Morgan Stanley called, and he says, I'm looking for Julie Grettenberger. You know, I'm a recruiter. I want to talk to her about a possible job. And I said, oh, well, I don't think you have the right number. I'm not a banker. Bye. And I hung up. And I thought later when I tell the story, when I think about it, I'm like, oh, my goodness, I'm sure God's up there going, I just sent you what you asked for, and you just closed the door. Like, come on, people. Thankfully, the recruiter calls back and says, no, I got the right person. Will you please come in and speak to our bosses? And I did. And you know, I'm you know, going on 3 years strong in the asset team and development. I'm their geologist on the team, and I can't absolutely say enough about it. You know, that in the, you know, I zipped through the last 15 years for you guys, but of all the bumps and everything that I went through, you know, the big major points were stay engaged, stay proactive. If you're in the beginning of your career, ask those of us with the expertise to help you. If you're at the end of your career, stay plugged in at what's coming through the pipeline, because those guys are getting the new software. They're getting the new technology. They're getting, I guess it's the same thing, they're getting the new ideas. And if we don't know those ideas, then we become outdated as well. It's a constant proactive engagement. It's terrible that we're going through COVID, but I do think that I was so equipped by the time this got here, because I was so actively ready and prepared with a strong resume, strong references, always asking myself, what if it happens again? If the oil industry drops again, where do I work? What do I do? What's my backup plan? And not to the point where you stress on it, but the point that you are prepared for it is the major take-home, you know, from this, from me to you guys. All right, and I wanted to share not just my story, but just I'll wrap it up with 3 other quick stories. So if you can go to the next slide. So I'm sure this woman comes to no surprise as you guys, is Oprah Winfrey. She's absolutely incredible. What you may not know is from the age of 9, she was sexually abused. She went through a tragic, beginning and terrible home life, jumping from place to place. When she finally landed her first job, she was fired because she was told that she was too emotionally invested. And she has gone on to be one of the most wealthy, amazing women in her industry. But she did not let those things, those hiccups, when life happens, she did not allow that to get in her way. She's one that, you can go to the next slide. So the actress on the next slide is Charlize Theron, and she's another actress, but I just an incredible story. Growing up in South Africa, she witnessed her mom shooting and killing her father. Started modeling slowly later, just finally said, fine, I'll go to acting school, I guess. And she has received all kinds of incredible awards, and has continued to put out incredible movies and things like that. Again, she certainly didn't ask for the life she was dealt, but she took it and made it, and really gives back to her community and what have you. All right, next slide. This third person that I'm going to share with you, you may not have ever heard from, but I'll end it with her, and she is just absolutely has my utmost respect. Her name is Victoria Arlen. Victoria Arlen is a young girl that at the age of 11 was diagnosed with transverse myelitis and acute disseminated encephalomyelitis. That's basically all fancies to say she had encephalitis. And it could have been treated. It wasn't. She was she almost immediately went to a vegetative state. She was in that state for 4 years. In the midst of being in that vegetative state, she could hear what the doctors and the doctors and the nurses were saying about her when they would talk about she should just die and all these terrible things. She could hear her mom praying over her. She could hear her dad's cries over her. And all of these things that she heard laying there helpless for years as a child. And they told her to unplug her from life support. She'd never make it. After 2 years, she woke up, mentally woke up. They again told her there's no way she'd make it. She went on to get her upper extremities, her movement back. She got her verbal skills back. She's one of 3, so she's a triplet. And when they got her back home, her 2 brothers, as you can imagine siblings are, really didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for her issues. So they picked her up and threw her in the pool. And although paralyzed from the waist down, she ended up swimming and realized that she still had a great talent for that, and went on to win 1 gold and silver medals for Team USA. She has since continued to strive and get better, and this last season, 25, she was actually on Dancing with the Stars. I end and wrap up this talk from a quote from her that says, "Face it, embrace it, defy it, and conquer it." And in her story, she asked her mother, why does God hate her so much to have put her through all that? And her mother's response, I thought was awesome, came back and said, "Baby, God doesn't hate you. It's the devil knows how absolutely amazing you are. And he's doing everything in his power to make sure you don't become who you were meant to be." And so I want to leave you with that notion, no matter what you think is coming down the pipeline to you right now. Ladies, we have so much left to offer and to give and to do that it is just exciting. You can go to the next slide. And so with that, I'll wrap it up and just say thank you so much for God, family, and friends who got me through this. The Houston Women's Leadership Summit. You guys are awesome. Thank you for putting this on and continuing to put this on. Morgan Stanley, I can't say enough about the company. And just remember, lady, when life happens, when you don't plan it, so therefore we just got to be ready and be proactive. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. All right, panel, I'll pass it back to you guys.
Hey, Julie, thank you so much. What an inspiring presentation and such a story that you shared with us. During the presentation, Sandy sent you a virtual hug from the audience, and Sarah's amazing story. Thanks for sharing. So I do have some questions. I do have some questions for you. So
Oh,
the
yes.
first question, actually, Kimberly said, thank you for sharing your personal story also. So I don't want to miss anybody that's making comments. So if anybody has a live question before I read the written question, you can do so now by hitting *6 on your phone, and I'll just give it a pause to see if anybody wants to ask a live question.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So you've been through an incredible experience and you've learned a lot. What would you offer to people who are, haven't really prepared themselves for a crisis of some kind? What would your advice be to the ladies regarding how do you can't always completely prepare yourself for a crisis, but you can certainly take some steps. What would that advice be?
I start off by forgiving yourself for not being ready, because I just don't think it's one of those things that we are taught and prepared to do, right? I don't think anyone has a class on, hey, when life really messes with you, this is what you're going to do. They kind of give you the golden ticket and not really what happens to the other kids that didn't get one. And so, one, just forgive yourself for not being there, but just make a personal promise to yourself that that's never going to happen again. And by never happening again, you can be proactive in, maintaining keeping your resume up to date, being flexible, and, what opportunities are out there. I thought for sure I'd be a medical doctor. I'm a geologist. Just because your plan's one way doesn't mean God's not going to put you on the path the other way. And talking to your peers, talking to people you trust. I send random messages to people on LinkedIn that I admire, and I'm talking like big guys, like people that probably should never be talking to me, kind of people who have millions of followers, and I ask them just simply the same kind of question I said before: is if you had any advice, what would it be? You don't have to answer me. But what if they did? And then they did. And so just don't hesitate to be creative and get out there and go, okay, all right, so COVID happened. I, personally, in the geology world, there have been hundreds of my colleagues that are no longer employed and very possibly will never be employed again in the geology world. That's tough. So then what's your next step? Do you teach our sciences as a teacher? Go through your resume and kind of figure out where do I overlap? What other industries do I overlap with? What can I start building so that I am ready and I'm more flexible and I'm more marketable? That's probably the biggest thing, is what kind of tools can you put in your basket the fastest to get that where you are more marketable? And that's probably the biggest one that's really helped me succeed and continue forward.
Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you both for the question and the answer. Great answer and great question. Would anybody else like to ask a live question? Okay, I'm going to read a question that came in for us, Julie. So the question is, have you had any mentors help you through these difficult times? What tips do you have for finding strong mentors who can help get you through those hard times?
Yeah, that's a great one, and I can't stress how critical it is. I was super excited to hear there was a mentoring program with you guys, through the Women's Leadership Summit. I think, yeah, so my mentors include professors, and I mentioned the Alumni Council. I can't stress that enough. These are people that have walked the walk for 20 and 30 years. They're going to tell you the good and the bad, and they're not going to sugarcoat it. If someone's sugarcoating it for you, you need to move along. When it comes to me, what I think of a good mentor is this is the person that's good. It's kind of like your best friend that tells you when your breath smells. Like there's the people that won't tell you, and then there's the people that will. And in this case, you really need someone that is going to be just brutally honest with you about what it is and what isn't out there, because you don't have time to be wrong. And so the tips that I got from them were there was a lot of mention in the first panel about communication, and I can't stress that enough. In my job in particular, communication is one of the things I got from the CEOs of the oil and gas companies that mentored me. And basically it came down to my field in particular is very complicated and can be very complicated. And so if I get in a meeting and I start wooing everyone with all of my great geologic terms, the only people in there that care are the other geologists. The other 90% of the people in the meeting don't have a clue what I'm talking about and are very unimpressed. And so he used to come back and say, you need to be able to explain what you do to your children, not in a condescending way, but in a way that they can get it. If you can master that, you're going to go far in any career you do. And I think that's really critical to understanding that ability to explain very concisely and in an understandable manner so that people can really get the message you're trying to convey, regardless of what industry that you're in. And so, yeah, so I think that's been the biggest advice I had is I pulled from the my alumni council. And then I just latch on to people within my industry. Don't hesitate, though, if you get someone. I always use a rule of thumb in my professional career of 3. I tell an idea to 3 different unrelated people, so that way if someone decides you're going to steal my idea, I have the other 2 to go, no, Julie told me that last week. I also do the same with mentors. I have 3 unrelated mentors. They're not in the same industry. They're in totally different walks of life. If they kind of all give me the same advice, then I consider it golden. If they're off, then I just kind of keep researching and going back through my answer until I figure it out. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, definitely, indeed. Thank you for that answer. I have 2 more questions for you, so I'm going to ask this one first. How do you combat ageism? I'm not ready to stop moving up, but I know that others may see me as too old.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good one because I'm that person. So you can imagine when I started, by the time, as my mother would say, I finally adulted, I did not graduate from my master's degree until 2010. And well, no, that's wrong, 2008. And by the time I got my first real adult job, as my mom likes to call it, I was in my 40s already. And so I was in my 40s, married with 2 children, and by this time, my second marriage with 4 children, and I was starting internship programs with literally what I would call children because they're like 21 and 22 and invited me out to the bar for a drink after work, which was quite comical, I thought. But yeah, so I've dealt with the age thing my entire career because people look at me and think I should have 25 years because I'm 47, when in fact I have, I'm going to count my internship so I can get up to 14 years, but I'm really pushing it, right? And so I don't have the years that most people do at my age. And so I'm in a weird boat in that situation as far as age. I think you're as young as you want to portray yourself. I think as unfortunate as it is, our physical, how we carry ourselves physical it does matter. So I think being aware of how we present ourselves first that way, I personally believe matters. I don't think it's right, but I think that matters. I think part of making sure that you're still young enough to offer a company what they need, I would lean into, I think there's a tendency when you go to a conference and it says, oh, this is the 10 things you need to know if you're a new hire in your industry. And we don't typically go to those because I'm not a new hire and I don't really care. But at the same time, I do go to those because I want to know what they're telling the new people. Because if they're telling the new kids on the block, X, Y, Z, then I want to go to a job interview and say, hey, I can do this, but I'm also aware of X, Y, Z. So because you can believe that those kids are going to say that, and when they interview, that they know how to do that. And so so I just think that's a way you can bridge that age gap, between how old we really are versus the degree, the expectation, and the new hires coming in. At least that's how I do it. And so far, I haven't run into much pushback. I actually like being a little bit older. I think I can get away. For those of you that don't know me, I don't have much of a filter usually. I'm trying to be really good on this call, on these calls for you guys, but I'm typically pretty outspoken. And And I kind of like being a little older. I think we can get away with saying a little bit more than the younger generation. So I don't know. I kind of like it.
I totally agree with you on that. Being older does give you some leeway on not having to filter, and I've enjoyed that also. So yes, I agree. And that's a good point about the new hire. Find out what they're saying. Great answer to that question, and a great question. I'm going to have to hurry us up because we're about 7-8 minutes over. But I just want to make sure that I get this last question in. The last question is, what tools did you find necessary that were surprising to you?
I underestimated the power of my resume and my objective on the top, and I underestimated the power of my cover letter because most people don't pay to have that professionally done. I don't. I was cheap. I didn't have money. I was poor. Those are huge tools that have really I have been hired for every job I've ever applied for, and I don't think it's because I'm that awesome. I think I've just learned how to really market myself to make sure I am the one they want. And so I Google CEO resumes and CEO cover letters. I don't steal and hijack what they wrote because if it's not genuine, that's a whole other talk. But those are ways of how I came up with formats and how to do that. And then, like I said, I tailor the resume toward the job I want. But that, you figure, let's just say a starting geologist makes $100,000 a year. Every square on your resume, that's $25,000 worth of words. Like, you better make sure you write something on there worth it. And so that to me is your golden ticket, is building that and having that ready.
I like that. So good, strong advice from Julie today. A great presentation. Trudy sent you a NOLA Girls shout out. Lisa, Debbie, and Angela and Marissa all said that it was a great presentation. So lots of great feedback for this presentation today, Julie, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us.
Awesome, thank you, and don't hesitate anyone to reach out, to me personally. Like it's what we're here for. Thank you guys for having me.